Okay. Shavuot Tov, everyone. It's good to see everyone. It's been 2 weeks, so hopefully we're back on schedule now for the foreseeable future, or at least until Shavuot, because on Shavuot, the Sunday of Shavuot, we won't have a class. But till then and after that, we should be fine. Okay. So we're going to start. We're running a couple minutes late, so we're just going to jump into it. We're in chapter 2 of Judges. So just to give us a quick reminder of what we saw in chapter 1, and it's pertinent for what we're going to see here in chapter 2. So we saw the opening of chapter 1. We saw the parallel between the opening of chapter 1 of Joshua and the opening the opening of the first book. The first chapter of Judges. We saw the parallel between the opening of Judges and the opening that we saw at the beginning of Joshua, and it was after the death of, right? And we saw that, and we saw how there is no leader, right? And we saw how there seems to be this kind of dispersion. Joshua doesn't appoint a successor. Hashem doesn't appoint a main leader. It seems, the tribe of Judah kind of rises on its own, and it goes ahead and takes an initiative, and then the tribe of Joseph does the same, but to a lesser degree. And then we saw how gradually each one of the tribes, and we saw how the chapter went through each one of the tribes, explaining what they did not do, and how the situation, as we grew away from the center, from Judah and the sons of Yosef, Ephraim and Manasseh, as we grew further and further from that geographical center, how the relationship between the individual tribes and the surrounding nations seems to deteriorate more and more and more. And we saw that this kind of, we pointed this out to as the opening to the book, of how this book is going to be about the individual tribes, not about the collective, not about central leadership that has a direction and a goal, like Joshua did, right? The opening of Joshua, the chapter defined the goals, the purpose of this stage, so on and so forth. We didn't see any of that in the opening chapter. And I'm repeating all this not just to remind us, because it's very significant for the second chapter. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and jump in. Everyone with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so chapter 2, verse 1. And I'd be very interested to hear, those of you who are using a different text, meaning a different translation, I'd be very interested to hear if you see any significant difference between what I'm going to read and what your translation has. I'm starting to read verse 1. An angel of Hashem went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up from Egypt, and I have brought you to the land that I have sworn to your forefathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. The opening words of this sentence, does anyone have a different translation?
The Quran says, I caused you to go out of Mitzrayim. I don't know whether that's much different.
Okay. What about the very beginning? An angel of Hashem. How does Quran translate it? Same? An
angel of the Lord.
Emissary of Hashem.
Emissary. Okay. Because this is a good example where translation immediately leads to interpretation. In Hebrew, the word that is used is malach. The problem or the difficulty with the word malach is that depending on the context, it could either mean angel or messenger. We find it throughout Tanakh, sometimes being used in one form and sometimes in the other form. I'll give you an example. We say in Psukei, we say in what? So
I was thinking about, wasn't the thing with Yaakov or something like that? He said he met a man, but was it an angel or was it a real person? Like, there's a number of times where, like,
yes, yeah, almost every time the term malach appears, there's discussion: is it an angel, as in like an angelic spirit, some type of spiritual entity or manifestation, or is it a human being who's acting as a messenger and therefore is called a malach? So I'll give you a good example. So you are, Paul, you are correct to think like, because practically everywhere that the term appears, there's a discussion about it. So for instance, the discussion appears when it says about Avram Avinu, that he's sitting at the entrance of his tent, and he sees Shlosha Malachim, okay? And there's discussion whether those were actual angels or humans who were just messengers in order to for Avram Avinu to do the mitzvah. But I'll give you a good example where it's very clear. We say in Psukei de Zimra, we say this, Oseh Malachav Ruchot, which is a verse in one of the Psukei de Zimra that we say in Shacharit of Shabbat, that God makes the wind his malachim. Oseh Malachav Ruchot. God makes the wind makes his angels wind. Okay, meaning that the word malach could be anything that is fulfilling a mission that God appointed for him. So this could just easily be a human being. So for instance, over here, that some commentaries say that over here malach means an actual angel, and some commentators come and say no, that this is a messenger. Some commentators based on the Midrash say that this is actually Pinchas, that this messenger, this malach is Pinchas, okay, who we know is still somewhere there in the background, right? We met him at the very end. What?
Did you say Pinchas is Eliyahu and Navi as well?
So yes, later on, which is much later on, when we get to the book of Kings, we meet Eliyahu, and then the Midrash comes and says that Eliyahu and Pinchas are the same person. But over here, and over there, it's a little more fantastical and harder to accept as something which is factual, because he's talking about hundreds of years in between them. Over here, we know that Pinchas is still basically around. We met him at the very end of the book of Joshua, with that whole episode when the 2.5 tribes went back to the eastern side of the Jordan River, and they built an altar, and the rest of the Jewish people were going to wage war against them. But before they waged war, they sent Pinchas to mediate between them. So we know that Pinchas is very likely still around, and that's one of the reasons some of the commentators say, well, who could have been sent to rebuke, we'll see in a moment, to rebuke the people? The most appropriate person still around, who would be seen as a moral figure, who could come from a place of authority to rebuke them, because there isn't any other leader. As we saw last chapter, there is no new leader. They're leaderless. So if someone is going to be rebuking them, the most logical person that it would be is Pinchas. So that's some of the commentators say that, but others come and say, no, this is an angel. This is not a prophet. Yes.
I don't follow what the difference would be. An angel is sent as a messenger. God doesn't send an angel without some purpose behind it. It's not a random event. There's a message behind.
So excellent. So Ron, I agree with you 100%. Which is, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is, what's the difference? And I would agree, it doesn't make a difference. It makes absolutely no difference whether this is a normal human being who is a prophet and is relaying a message, or even taking upon himself to relay what he thinks would be, in line with God's instructions and message, or an angelic figure, whatever that may mean. Which is why, by the way, and I agree with you, Ron, which is why I much prefer the interpretation that understands it as a prophet. What is the difficulty with understanding that this phrase means prophet? What's the difficulty with understanding that?
Hebrew word malachim. You said it could be both, but it sounds like an angel.
Okay. There's a much simpler difficulty. Yes, Sylvia.
But this is somewhat slightly different. How would the people be able to distinguish an angel? Because none of them are like they have prophecy or anything. They're not on that level. So how would they even? Spiritual. Yeah. How would they even know? And why would they?
Okay.
They could just. It's a false person. Same thing.
I agree. Very good point. I think there's another difficulty with the explanation. But I'm saying, on the other hand, right, I agree with you that that's a difficulty in that direction. But there is another difficulty in saying that it is just a prophet who was sent, because then why is the word malach used? Just say. Meaning, it's not as if we lack places where Hashem says to a prophet, go tell the people, go rebuke the people, go tell the people that I am unhappy with what they're doing. So there's this unclear, why is this person not being given a name? Why is he not being given the term, at least the title? God sent a prophet. So let's leave that open for now. Meaning, I'm saying even if it is an actual prophet, which some of the commentaries say, many of the commentaries say, and I definitely prefer that interpretation, and it fits better with how I would see it happening. But then the question becomes, and why use this ambiguous term? Why not just say, like many other places, Hashem said to X, go tell the people. Ta 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 ta. Yes, yes, Galia.
If it's some angelic somebody, I don't know. So why he is down in Gilgal?
Why is he what?
Why he is in Gilgal?
Why not?
Why? People already, they're all over the Israel.
Oh, okay, good. So now we're going to continue reading, and you're asking an excellent question, which is, you're basically saying, when is this happening? Let's continue reading. Okay, so we have this angel, this messenger, this prophet, this ambiguous something, someone, okay, and preaching to the people. Goes on to say, verse 2, and you shall not make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. Their altars you shall smash, but you have not obeyed me. What have you done? And I also said I will not drive them out from before you, and they will be pokers to you, and their gods will be a stumbling block to you. And it was while the messenger of Hashem was saying these words to all the children of Israel, that the nation raised their voices and cried. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed to Hashem there. But the word Bochim in Hebrew comes from the word Boche. Boche means to cry. So they named the place of crying. By the way, can you guys see me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good, okay. Okay, questions, comments. So first we have, I guess, Galia's question, which is, when exactly is this taking place? Okay. Other questions or comments? Wait, before that, I want to read verse 2 and 3 again, because I think they're very important. Let's read verse 2 and 3 again. And you shall not make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. Their altars you shall smash, but you have not obeyed me. What have you done? And I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, and they will be pokers to you, and their gods will be a stumbling block to you.
I'm trying to remember, did we not say 2 weeks ago that Hashem through a messenger directly said, I will drive them out? The people before you.
Okay, so yes, we did. Meaning, yes.
Something happened in between.
Yes, Josh. No, you're correct. At the end of Joshua, in Joshua's parting speech, we saw he had 2 speeches, and we saw the different purposes of each speech. He said that he will drive them out. Yes. So what's your question?
So did this happen? Did something happen in between when he said he would, and then we as a people made agreements we shouldn't have made, or didn't take actions we should, and then this is a consequence? But that part of the story seems not to be spoken out.
Right. The correlation between verse 2 and 3 is very confusing, right? Meaning, is this cause and effect, or is it not, right? And you shall not make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land, but you have not obeyed me. What have you done? So over here it seems like, okay, I told you to not to make a covenant with them, and that you should destroy their idol, the places of idol worship, but you didn't obey. But then verse 3 says, I will not drive them out from before you. So are these the same event, or are these 2 different events? Meaning you're saying that you're not supposed to make a covenant with them, rather you should drive them out. But then you're saying, Hashem is saying, I will not drive them out before you. But if they're making covenants with him, then how is he not driving them out before them? The verses seem not to fit. Yes, Galia.
Looks some kind of mishmash between Zmanim. He went to Bochim, but in 4, it just, they call it Bochim. He went to Bochim before they even named this place Bochim.
Right. So this is actually a common thing. You're right. This isn't actually so uncommon that the Tanakh will already, because the story is being written down in later years. So in later years, this location is known already what it's called, but it's telling the story of how it got that name. So it's saying it's like saying it's like saying like when Avram went to Jerusalem. He said, what happened in Jerusalem? Well, in Jerusalem, Avram Avinu, he took his son and went up and did so on and so forth. But it wasn't called Jerusalem yet. But when you're looking at it after the fact, in a historical perspective, we call it that. It's telling us how it became known as the place called Bochim. But I agree with you. It's very unclear when this is happening. Yes, Sylvia.
It seems as if we don't have the whole story. It seems like they did something that we don't know about, and now they're getting in trouble for doing it, and therefore Hashem is now not going to help them chase out these guys.
Well, you're right, but one could. We don't have to look too far to try to figure out what part is missing here. We saw chapter 1. In chapter 1, we heard how each one of the tribes, and we saw, slowly and gradually, as you grew further away from the Mishkan, further away from the centers, the strong centers of Judah and the tribes of Joseph, that the tribes we saw. Some of them didn't even try so hard to get rid of the other nations. Some of them were okay that the other nations live among them. Some of them ended up, they themselves, living among the other nations. So this could be seen, one could say, okay, that's chapter 1. Showed us that as the tribes started going to their own areas, they slowly but surely became lax in this commandment that they had of driving out the nations. That was chapter 1. Showed us how each tribe didn't do their job fully. Judah came the closest. Yes, Ron?
I have a real problem with the statement that says their gods will be a stumbling block. They're idols. I mean, that's one of the tenets of Judaism is the idols are just fake. There's no power in it. And now here the statement is that their gods are going to be a stumbling block. Not these people are going to be a stumbling block, but those people's gods, those idols, are going to be a stumbling block. That's attributing power to idols.
Okay, and the question is?
I think, I was just saying, I think a tenet in Judaism is idols are a piece of wood or whatever. They're nothing. They don't have any power, and here they're saying they're going to be a stumbling block. They have power.
Well,
they're a stumbling block.
Okay. What did you say, Sylvia?
But they have in the past that Baal Peor also was a stumbling block to them, like.
We'll get we're going to meet Baal Peor again in a moment. Yes. I'd say, Ron, that you're right, but also not so, because the Torah works very hard to say over and over again that idols are nothing. If I have to tell you, okay, so on the one hand, okay, the Torah treats idols as if they're nothing. They're just lumps of wood and pieces of stone, and therefore they're meaningless. But if I have to tell someone over and over and over again that a certain thing in the world means nothing, to say it over again, it means nothing. How many times have I told you, this means nothing? It's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. What does that mean?
It means something.
Well,
It means
we might instinctively see something in it.
it means that on the simple level, on the day-to-day encounter with this thing, it's like saying, it's like when you're talking to teenagers or to many people about watching movies and fixation on TV shows or video games, saying what it's nothing. It's absolutely worthless. It's imaginary. It has no impact on the real world. It's nothing. Yeah, you can say that 1,000 times, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is it deeply impacts. It captures people's imagination. And people get very emotional about it, and they can devote a lot of time to it and a lot of money to it, and it can have a drastic effect on their emotional state and then their psychological state. And and none of that takes away from the fact that it's absolute nonsense. It's worthless. It's meaningless. But I use that example not by coincidence. Both of those things like using the example of, let's say, video games with teenagers, with kids, and idols, it's something which is very, very tangible in the sense that it gives immediate gratification to a certain aspect of the human condition, of the human. So, if it's video games, if it's a rush, if it's an adrenaline, if it's the stimuli of the light and of the movement, and if it's with idol worship. The fact that throughout Tanakh and in the book of Judges, we'll see it soon, it is one of the central themes of the entire book of Judges. It means that something about idol worship satisfies something within the human condition, at least at that time. Maybe still. We'll discuss later on, try to understand a little bit better. But, so Ron, you are right, that the Torah works very hard to tell us that idols are nothing but lumps of wood and stone. But what that means is that for the people who are living during that time and experiencing the encounter with idol worship and idol worshippers, it is not meaningless. It is not nothing. It obviously has a very powerful impact on them somehow. Yes, Paul?
I mean, it's one of the big three that we have to die for. So obviously there's a drive to idolatry, and that's the chapter.
Yes.
I think. But I just had a question. Did we read verse 4? I'm not sure whether we got to 4. Did we just read out verse 4?
Yeah, we did. I just want to say, yeah, sorry.
I have a question in verse 4. When they say that people lifted their voice and wept, the last time the people wept was with this, that I remember, was with respect to the spies. Are they in trouble for having wept here, or is this appropriate weeping?
No, this seems to be appropriate weeping, right? They're weeping because this seems to be, this rebuke has it's impacting them. They feel, they're being told that they're being punished. This is.
I don't know whether they could have done more, but they have done tshuva, or said, and so we will act. If this is the consequence, we will act and we will do.
Yes, it seems to be an acceptance of guilt. You feel bad. I feel, and they're being told that there's a consequence to what happened. I just want to go back to what Ron, what you asked, because something that Ron, that you said, we'll see soon later on, I think is a very good point. Ron, you said, why doesn't it say that the idol worshippers are the stumbling block? Why does it say the idol, the gods, right? Meaning the idols themselves would be the stumbling block. I think it's an excellent point. We would think that the danger is they'll be influenced by the people, by the nations, by the culture that they're meeting. And I want to leave that question open because I think you're correct to notice this distinction, and I think there's very good reason for this. Meaning we would expect it to be, that you'll be influenced by the nations, not that you'll be influenced not that you'll be tempted by the gods, right? By the idols. You'll be tempted by the idol worshippers. It doesn't say that. Okay? I do want to point out one more question that I find to be difficult, which is in verse 3, and I also said, I will not drive them out from before you. So this now seems to be a punishment. But the question is, meaning, at what point, in this, Gali, I think you said this, is a mishmash of times, when it says, I will not drive them out from before you, and I also said. What does that mean, I also said? Also, this is in addition to what? Meaning, what comes first? Does it come first that they didn't that the Jewish people, that the children of Israel did not try to drive them out, but it had come first that God did not let them drive them out. Right? And I also said, I will not drive them out from before you. And they will be poked. But I want to leave that question open. Okay? Meaning is when God says, I God will not drive them out from before you. When is this? Is this the reason the children of Israel weren't able to drive them out? Because we saw that they tried. At least some of them tried, at least in some of the places. Or is this the punishment for the Jews not trying hard enough? It doesn't say. It doesn't. It's not clear cut here.
But that would beg the question: why would Hashem not drive them out if it wasn't as a result of this?
Okay, so that's the question we're going to leave open for now.
Maybe he didn't want for some purpose not to help them.
Okay, so we're leaving this open. We're leaving this open, meaning there definitely seems to be a correlation here between, on the one hand, there's something they did not do completely, they didn't do it fully, they didn't do it the way they were supposed to. On the other hand, it seems like God has not made it too easy for them. Maybe even more than that. Okay, let's continue.
By the way, from a translation standpoint, I don't know whether it makes much difference. They use the word moreover. I said, I will not drive them out, as opposed to also, but maybe it's the same thing. It's just
I think it's similar. Okay. So the questions we have that we've left open are: why the ambiguous phrase about who is speaking to them and rebuking them? Why doesn't it say prophet, or why doesn't it say the name? What is the question that Ron asked of why is the emphasis here on the gods and not on the people that are going to be influencing us, that we're living amongst them, we're living amongst us? And when it says that God also will not, is saying I will not drive them out, is this just a punishment for the Jewish people not trying hard enough, or is there more going on here? Those are our questions. Verse 6. And Joshua had sent away the nation, and the children of Israel went, each man to his inheritance, to possess the land. And the nation served Hashem during all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, and who had seen all the great deed of Hashem that he had performed for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Hashem, died being 110 years old, and they buried him within the border of his inheritance in Timnath Cheres, on the mountain of Ephraim, to the north of Mount Gash. And also the generation were gathered to their forefathers, and also all that generation were gathered to their forefathers, and there arose another generation after them who knew not Hashem, nor the deed which he had done for Israel. Questions, comments, observations?
That last line is very troubling. One generation, and they did not know the work that Hashem had done.
It looks like Mitzrayim with the Pharaoh.
I agree with both statements. I think are spot on. Paul, yours is saying that this seems to be pretty quick. But the question is, what is it? It's meaning, it doesn't say that. I mean, what does it say? It says, "Who knew not Hashem nor the deed which He had done for Israel." So one option is to come and say that we take this literally. They did not know that God took them out of Egypt. Okay, it might mean that. Okay, it might mean that, but it's doubtful. It's hard to believe that, as far as information-wise, they didn't know the story of. It's very difficult to believe that they weren't told the story.
Were they meant to have a Pesach Seder every year still at this point?
Yes. But
So
it's
that
funny.
alone?
It's funny that you should ask that, because there's dispute about that actually. Because much later on, many years later, we hear about a big Pesach celebration. There's discussion there. Is this such a big deal because they didn't have one, or just because they didn't do it correctly? But no, it would be very difficult to accept that they didn't know they didn't know the story. But obviously there's a very big difference between the people who actually experienced it versus people who are, look, You know what? You don't have to go that far. Take stories that we've from our past generation. You know, can you really, someone who has lived during the 6-day war and remembers seeing it as it's unfolding, remembers, and this I am not included in this description. Someone who remembers what the atmosphere was right before the 6-day war and the fear that this new state is not going to make it, and the 6 days of war, no one knowing what's going on, and then afterwards, after 6 days, the someone hearing that story today, it is far less significant than someone who actually lived through it. Go back to the establishment of the state of Israel. So most of us sitting, hearing this, I don't want to guess anyone's specific age, but someone who actually remembers it not as a baby but as an adult or as a teenager, there's no question that someone today, hearing the story, even hearing it in a very passionate way, that the event impacts them as powerfully as someone who lived through it, or go a few years before that. When you sit and you hear the story of survivors, so the fact that I know the story and I can repeat it, does the impact of the event have the same significance to me? Of course not. And what about when my kids grow up and they will no longer meet any survivors? They'll hear the story, they'll hear the exact same story, but the event will be much less impactful, and the message, whatever the messages are of the Holocaust or of the establishment of the State of Israel, the 6-day war will be far less significant and far less powerful and far less impactful for their lives. Not because they don't know that it happened or because they doubt whether it happened. It's just the way things are. The people who experience the event, it's far more impactful for them. Yeah.
I just don't understand such a huge state in Jewish nation, the ethnic tribe, and they don't know, nobody told them the story.
So I said, it is unthinkable that it's unthinkable, and we see later. And we will see later on in the book that of course they knew that they left Egypt, and of course they knew about the splitting of the sea. But so when it says they did not know God, it does not mean not to know that God exists. There's a lot of different levels of knowing. I could know that something happened, but it doesn't impact me. The knowledge of it is technical knowledge versus a knowledge which is something which is incorporated into my life. Now, I don't think it's trying to say they did not know of the events that took place less than 100 years before their time. But I do agree that it's being phrased in a very extreme way, as if they didn't know about it at all. What I'm suggesting that it is not they did not know that these events took place, is that it's like I could know something, as theoretical knowledge, but I don't know it. It's not knowledge which is part of my life. It is not knowledge which has any impact on. It's like historic. It's like I know. Okay, here's an example. I know that the French Revolution happened. I even know when it happened. I even know some of the specific history. In what way does this knowledge impact my daily life? Nothing, not at all. I know that it happened, but that knowledge is not knowledge that serves me in any way. It's not. It's. I'd say it's academic knowledge. But I don't. Yeah.
But I both have a problem with this.
You know what? French Revolution.
Yes.
You don't look just what happened in France. You have to see what waves it brought in the world. This French Revolution and the history. What happened after? What came after?
Yeah, but it means no. But the French Revolution means nothing to me on a daily basis. It means nothing to me. Meaning, if you were to ask me, if you were to start discussing with me the structure of democracy in the Western civilization today, and we sat down and had an intellectual discussion about it, yes, probably the concept of the French Revolution would probably come up. But when I go outside and I'm interacting with people and I'm, on a daily basis, the French Revolution, it's academic knowledge. It means nothing to me. What I'm saying here is, what I'm saying here is there's a lot of different types of knowledge, or knowledge impacts us in different ways. And what I'm saying here is there's two options here. Either to come and say they actually did not know that these, even at an academic level, they had no clue that these events took place. It's one option, which could be read into the text, definitely. Option two, which is what I'm suggesting, because we do find later on in the book many references to the Exodus and references to the splitting of the sea. Okay, and if all the nations of Canaan, 40 years after the splitting of the sea, as Rachav said, knew about it, it's very difficult to think that suddenly, within 20 years of those events of Joshua dying, 25, 30 years, all the Jews suddenly have no clue that it happened. So that is one option, but it's very, very difficult to imagine that is what what took place. Option two is to come and say, listen, are there Jews today who know the Holocaust happened, but none of the lessons of the Holocaust are acceptable to them, or that or have allowed themselves to not be impacted at all by the concept of a third of the Jewish people being destroyed? Absolutely. Meaning it is knowledge which is completely disconnected from how they live their lives as Jews, how they live their lives as human beings. Most people in the world, most people in the civilized world know the Holocaust happened. They know it as academic knowledge. Does this affect their daily life and interaction with other people? No, because it's academic knowledge. It's not knowledge which you are, what's what I'm looking for, which fizzles down into your personality. Meaning, it is not. I'm missing a word here. I'm not sure what word I'm looking for here. There's knowledge which is purely scholastic or academic, and there's knowledge which impacts every part of your personality and your life. So that those people who are coming into the land of Israel, and they themselves were freed from Egypt, from slavery, they themselves experienced walking through the desert for 40 years and experiencing getting water and bread every day, and walking through the Red Sea. Then when they come into the land of Israel, those experiences are tremendously, they're part of their personalities, they're part of their everyday life. It's not something you could shake when you are taken out from slavery. It's part of who you are. And walking through the desert like that and being brought into a land of milk and honey. This is not something that you could shake. This is part of your personality. Whereas when you tell this story to your children or grandchildren, so they know, yeah, I know, my grandfather told me about this. But does that mean that you're going to walk around feeling grateful, that you're going to walk around feeling that this is going to, you're going to struggle more with not following in the ways because you feel great? No. Yeah, Paul.
I don't know whether Rabbi's looking for the word experiential. Assimilate.
There you go. Yes. Assimilated knowledge.
But I guess the question I was wondering is, when I come back to the Seder, my understanding is what we're meant to accomplish on Seder night is it is supposed to be experiential. We're supposed to feel like we went out. So we're trying to do this thousands of years later, and we can only build upon what previous generations have done as far as linkage. So if they couldn't or didn't,
fine,
on a day-to-day basis.
But the truth is, the example that you're bringing proves the point. How successful are we in passing on the story to the future generations? So hopefully we all try very hard, and we might be luckier than others in being the beneficiaries of such stories, or choosing to be part of a community that has enabled us to have the passion and the knowledge and the tools to be able to pass that on. and to raise our kids, hopefully as part of a community, as part of that, But as we know, most Jews, definitely most Jews, for instance, in North America,
It's dinner at 6 o'clock.
they would read this and say, absolutely, this is what I see happening all around me. Okay, I do want to continue. Okay, we do have, because I don't mind, because I think this is a very important point. I just do want to point out, Galia, you pointed out something when you said that verse 10 reminds you of the phrase from Egypt. You are absolutely right, especially in the Hebrew. It is the exact same phrase, and it says Asher lo yad'u, that they did not know. That phrase is the exact phrase used about the king, about Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph. It's not a coincidence. As we know, when phrases are used, it throws you back to other events. It tries to tie between the two, and it just goes to show you how severe the storyteller, the Navi here, the Tanakh, is trying to be, and trying to link this forgetfulness, and also over there, by the way, right? Over there, when this is a known thing, right? When it says the Pharaoh did not know Joseph. So there are two classic interpretations. Either he actually did not know that Joseph existed, but most commentators give a different interpretation. They say he made himself as if he doesn't know. Meaning he knew, but he didn't allow that knowledge to impact what he did and it wasn't significant for him, that knowledge. It wasn't assimilated knowledge, or he chose to ignore it because it did not impact him. He didn't want it to impact him. Okay, we got to continue. We have to continue.
Can I ask, Rabbi, how the chunk in 1 to 5 ties into the chunk in 6 to 10?
Okay, so if we had more time, I'm just going to answer that very quickly, because you're right. It's mishmashed completely. Verse 6 to verse 10, we were told, we heard this already. We heard it at the end of Joshua.
Oh, yeah.
It's practically a cut and paste, which raises the question even more so. The first clump from verse 1 to 5, when is it happening? Is it happening before Joshua passed away? Is it happening after Joshua? And then it's backtracking, reminding us then that Joshua, and the answer is, it's mishmashed. It's unclear. The commentators go bananas trying to figure it out, trying to put it in some kind of order. Okay? And obviously, to add to the confusion, and this will become a bigger question soon when we see the rest of the chapter, why is this appearing in chapter 2? Shouldn't all this be chapter 1 of Judges? Shouldn't this be, because you're going back and telling me about right, chapter 1 started off, and it was after the death of Joshua. But in chapter 2, you're backtracking, telling me, oh, Joshua died, in all his days, and the days of the elders after him, they worshipped Hashem. So that's before chapter 1. What's it doing in chapter 2? Just one big mishmash. Let's continue.
And last time we heard about when Joshua died, we didn't hear about this whole thing about the next generation didn't remember, did we?
We did hear, I think, that they kept, that we heard the positive, that they continued following the ways, all the days of Joshua and the elders who lived after Joshua, without the negative. If I remember correctly, we heard the positive without the negative.
I just flipped back, I didn't see this, and we would have spent a lot of time talking about it if we heard it before.
Yeah. Okay, we got to continue, because now comes the most interesting and puzzling part. Okay? And I'm just going to read it all the way through. Okay? Because we don't have that much time, but it really speaks for itself. And the children of Israel, we're in verse 11, and the children of Israel did that which was evil in the eyes of Hashem, and they served the Baalim. And they forsook Hashem, the God of their forefathers, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, and they went after other gods, of the gods of the nations that were around them. And they bowed to them, and they angered Hashem. And they forsook Hashem and served the Baal and the Ashtoreth, which is another type of idol worship. Verse 14, and the anger of Hashem was kindled against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers, and they spoiled them, and he gave them over into the hands of their enemies around, and they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of Hashem was against them for evil, as Hashem had spoken and as Hashem had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Verse 16, and Hashem raised up judges, and they saved them from the hands of those who had spoiled them. But also the judges they did not obey, for they went astray after other gods, and they bowed to them. They turned aside quickly from the way wherein their forefathers had walked, obeying the commandments of Hashem. They did not do so. And when Hashem raised judges for them, then Hashem was with the judge and saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For Hashem would be moved to pity by their cries because of those who oppressed and crushed them. And it was when the judge died that they would return and deal more corruptly than their forefathers, going after other gods to serve them and to bow down to them. They did not diminish of their practices nor of their stubborn way. And the anger of Hashem was kindled against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their forefathers, and have not obeyed me, I too will not continue to drive out any man from before them of the nations that Joshua left and died. And he died. Okay, I'm stopping here for now. I'm going to leave the last two verses for the end. So what's going on here? This is a fascinating piece for a lot of reasons, and it probably deserves its own class. But the truth is, it's very clear. It's basically telling us the synopsis of the entire book of Judges. It's describing a historical cycle that is going to repeat itself over and over for the next close to 400 years. But what's amazing is it's telling us this it's basically telling us that this is going to be the cycle. It's going to happen over and over and over. They're going to worship idols. God is going to deliver them into the hand of their enemies. They are going to be distressed and suffer. And God will take pity on them, though they do not deserve it. He is going to raise a judge for them. The judge will lead them in victory. They will not follow and listen to the judge, meaning they will start worshiping idols again, and the cycle will repeat itself. What's amazing is it's giving us this big picture, like historical. It's giving us kind of like the wide. It's telling us what is going to be the historical process for the next few hundred years, and it's telling us it's going to be a circle. It's going to go over and over again. Yes, Galia, what were you going to say?
16. Hashem put the judges, but they didn't listen to judges.
Right.
They didn't listen to judges either.
Well, we'll see, because what we're going to do throughout the book. Every judge we're going to meet, and every story of them being delivered into the enemy's hands, and then we'll look back and see, is it following the pattern or is it not following the pattern? To what degree is it following the pattern, and to what degree it isn't, and what might have changed? But if you continue reading, you see that it seems to say, in what way did they not listen to the judge? By going astray and following and starting to worship idols again. And that's what we'll see it's going to happen. After each judge comes, there's going to be quiet and everything's going to be fine for 20 years, 40 years, 10 years, 15 years, 18 years, and then it's going to say, and they started at some point serving idols again. And Ron, I want to point out here that it said repeatedly, it seems to be, and because we only have a few more minutes, I'll point out some of these things, that it doesn't seem to be that the main challenge in front of the children of Israel are the other nations, because I'll show what I mean. It doesn't say that they went after the nations. It says they went after the gods of the nations. Verse 12, and they went after other gods. And verse 13, they forsook Hashem and served the Baal and the Ashtoreth. Now I go back to Ron's question. Why doesn't it say Well, they were influenced by the other nations. They went after the other nations. Why doesn't it? Obviously, they're not just. Obviously, they're being influenced. Obviously, they're getting these are the gods of other nations, and the other nations are still living in the land. So why does it? And here I'm coming back to what Ron said, which is almost as if it's saying that these gods have power. I don't think that's really what it's saying, but it seems to be skipping over the intermediary of the influence, which is the other nations. And I think it is I'll just point out one more thing. Verse 15, wherever they went out, the hand of Hashem was against them for evil. It doesn't say that the nations, beat them. Meaning, who is the one who is being evil towards the Jewish people? Hashem. Meaning, it's almost as if it's trying to make sure we don't think that the cause of our worship, of our failures, or our successes, are the other nations. Meaning, if we would come and say, we were tempted by the other nations, we were influenced by other nations, we say, oh, what's the issue? The issue is the other nations. No. The other nations are just the litmus test. They are at this point I'll skip to verse 22. This is fascinating. Verse 22 flips the whole chapter on its head. Verse 21. I too will not continue to drive out any man from before them of the nations that Joshua left and he died, in order to test Israel through them, whether they would keep the way of Hashem to walk therein as their forefathers did keep it or not. And Hashem left these nations without driving them out hastily, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. Bam! Do you see what happened there? God left them to begin with. He did not allow the Jewish people meaning he made sure, so to say, meaning don't think, it's almost as if it's saying like this, don't think that it's a coincidence that you weren't able to drive them out. Because it was important for the Jewish people to have this big historical period meaning imagine for a second, meaning it was needed for them to have this period of time where they are faced with, for lack of a better word to say, to face their demons. To see can they be exposed to other influences and still stay true? And the answer is no, they weren't. But then we'll see, because if no other nations would be there, the relationship with God would be exclusive, but not through choice, not through challenge, not through tribulation, through default. Not through a choice between one thing and another thing, not a relationship which is refined through closeness and distance. It would be it was a relationship of no other option. What kind of relationship is a relationship that is a relationship that meaning a relationship by definition, a real relationship, is going to be one that has periods of closeness and distance, that has its ups and downs, that has its dependencies, that has the ability to be felt, that has a certain tension. So, on the one hand, the Jewish people are being blamed here for not doing their part, but it almost seems, and what I'm saying now sounds very objectionable. It sounds like God never really intended for them to be able to fully succeed. Yeah.
I mean, the way that I was describing it sounds very much like sometimes we talk about Mitzrayim, is they had to be there, it was part of the smelting pot that we had to go through slavery in order to come to be slaves to Hashem. We had to go through an experience of slaves to people.
Yes.
It was kind of saying we had to go through fighting with our drive to idolatry in order to finally be free of it after 400 years of fighting.
Yes.
Seems like a very similar kind of stages.
Yes. Now, yeah, absolutely. I think it is exactly the same idea. But, and there's a big point here, and I think it's a very important theological one, because once we say that, the danger or the one could easily find himself saying, well, so it's good that we were enslaved in Egypt. So what? It is good that, meaning that the Jews did not do their job of working harder to drive out the other nations. The answer is no. Each, meaning the Egyptians were not supposed to enslave the individual Egyptian. Was forbidden for being evil and for throwing Jewish babies and the individual Jew or tribe who's in the land of Israel now, their obligation is to go and conquer. But if you take a step back from it, look at it from the perspective of history, after the fact that something bad happens or someone doesn't do the right thing, we come and say, what, is it a coincidence? No. Meaning, each individual person has his obligation, and each tribe has its obligation. But then you take it back, okay, after the bad thing happened, or after a person or a tribe or a nation tries and fails, maybe didn't try hard enough, but fails in a certain mission, we come and say, that under the understanding that God oversees history, and that history has a certain direction, that it has and we have a destiny, which is hundreds or thousands of years in the making. So after the event happens, we come and we say, okay, now that it already happened, what is the significance of the situation that we are in? It'd be like saying, and I know what I'm saying could sound very controversial and maybe objectionable. Not a human being no rabbi or no decent human being in the world will come and say that anything about the Holocaust was good. God forbid to say such a thing. But after it happened, we don't say, oh, this was a mistake. After it happened, what is the significance of it after the fact? What conclusions can we draw from it to the human condition, to the situation, to the future of the Jewish people? Is it a coincidence that 3 years after the Holocaust, the state of Israel was established? Of course not. Does that mean that is the reason the Holocaust happened? No. Does that mean that it's good that it happened? Of course not. But after the thing happens, we come to say, if it happened, it's not a mistake, it's not a coincidence. What is the significance that we gain from it? What significance do we take from it? What impact does it have now that it has already happened? And I think that is what is going on over here. It says, you, the Jewish people, are supposed to work your hardest to get rid of. And look, and the tribe of Judah did a better job at it. And the tribe of Judah, therefore, we will see, throughout history, is going to be far less influenced by idol worship and far less influenced by surrounding cultures, because they did a better job. Even they didn't do everything. And again, it's not a coincidence, because they also needed to have their own trials and tribulations and gain a mature relationship with God and a mature, independent relationship as a tribe with the tribes around them. And the tribes that did even a worse job, so they are going to be a lot more susceptible, because they have a weaker resolve to begin with. If they had a weaker resolve to fulfill the missions of conquering the land and getting rid of the nations, then that weaker resolve will also manifest itself when it comes to being confident about their tradition, about their beliefs, about the stories that they heard from their parents, and how it impacts their behavior. So it seems what starts out as our weaknesses, after the fact we understand, fits into the grand plan in the development of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel, as they're coming to the land in this important historical period. And don't get tempted to think it's the fault of the other nations. It comes from our indecisiveness. And here's my political disclaimer. It is never the fault, meaning the difficulties we have with the other nations is the reflection of the challenges we have with our own beliefs, resolves, and self-confidence, and whatever. And this is a model that's being set down here at the beginning of, as we entering the land of Israel, as we're getting settled, the nations around us, they're here, they're not here by mistake. They're here in order to test our resolve, to test our persuasion, to test our behavior, but it's not their fault. Meaning, we need to do our job, try to drive them out. But don't think that while they're here, that this is not their fault. It is all up to us. It is all our decision. It is all our persuasion. It all comes from our decisiveness and our self-confidence and our belief and our faith and our engagement with our destiny and our job and so on and so forth. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I appreciate the Rabbi's words, and indeed, I mean, if we believe that Hashem is in control of all world events, then everything that happens to us is because of what we're doing rather than because of them. I think that's... But I'm just curious as to how we're meant to understand the lessons of this period that we're about to start studying, because my understanding is idolatry, the draw went down when we lost prophecy. So we don't have the same draw that they did. So these ups and downs that we're going to learn about, which I've always struggled with, and I've tried to learn Tanakh before, what are we meant to take from it as we go through the details?
So as we go through the stories, we'll see individual ones, but big picture, as I'd say, that the influences that are brought forward by the nations that we are living with or living amongst us, these are points that meaning whatever, I'll give it meaning the point that we were influenced by the other nations was towards idolatry. But that revealed that we have a challenge with idolatry. The fact that we could be influenced by the people around us towards idolatry doesn't mean that the problem is that they're idolaters. It means that within us at this point still there is a tendency towards idolatry. Otherwise we wouldn't be influenced by the nations around us to that. Right? So it means that the nations that are around us, that those influences that are around us, meaning a person is influenced by something that he has a weakness towards, something that he maybe is hoping that there's a little idolater in there, hoping that the moment he sees that idolatry or that temptation is before him, it's like someone who someone who's who's an alcoholic, who's in recovery, So if he goes to a party where he knows there's going to be alcohol, he's not very smart, or he's hoping. He knows he's not supposed to, but he's hoping. He's hoping that this will be his excuse to fail. And when he fails, these people around me, and I was weak because people around me offered me a drink. So it means that whatever the nations that we're living amongst, or that we're exposed to, that we have a relationship with, whatever the influences are that we're receiving from them, that means that these are the points that we need to strengthen. I'll use, again, and this is a very big political disclaimer here. For instance, if right now, this is not the only example, I could bring many others, but this is one that I like to use because it fits very well here. If we're living in a time and amongst nations who are constantly saying that this is not our land, and that the land of Israel is not, that the Jewish people do not have a right to the land of Israel, rather it is their land, and they have a religious right to it and a historic right to it, and we find that this is a point that that amongst ourselves we find ourselves conflicted about it. Some people feel very strongly this way. Other people come and say, no, it's not really our land. Or it's our land as much as it's theirs. And I find that to be a perfect example. Again, it's not idolatry, but in each generation, or in each time when we come into the land of Israel, there seems to be a point that becomes the point of contention, and it reveals our own weakness. If we are willing, if we have amongst us many people, and maybe all of us to some degree, who are uncertain about our claim to the land of Israel today, it's not, this is or are willing to incorporate or to accept, narratives like we don't have a right to it, the world has not recognized this area or that area, they deserve it just as much as we do, stuff of this sort. This is not the Arabs' fault. This reflects that we as a people have not yet have the full conviction as a nation that this is indeed our land, that it is part of our destiny, etc., etc. Now, I don't think that's the only message. That's one that I like because of my personal political persuasions. But I think there could be many others that could be used to come and say, look, the point that they are going to struggle with for the next 400 years is the main characteristic of the nations around them. But the main pointer, as Ron, as you so well pointed out, is we do not fault the other nations with it. That's the temptation. That it's not. This reveals a weakness that we have amongst ourselves. And it could take hundreds of years of struggle with that point until we gain that confidence, till we gain that persuasion, because it's not just an intellectual one. It is assimilated knowledge, one that comes through trial and error and trauma and being conquered and being humiliated even. But then seeing the cycle over and over, and slowly but surely this takes its effect over hundreds of years. Yes, Ron, you wanted to say something?
It's a question that, is idols that they're referring to stone and wood, or could we not have an idol, communism, socialism? Not you can't hold it, but people would bow down to it and give their life to a concept.
Absolutely.
For capitalism.
Absolutely. My answer to that is absolutely, because even in the ancient world, it's very tempting to think that they thought that they worshipped idols, and that they actually thought that this little wood statue is God. It's very tempting to think that, but the truth is that when in the research of paganism, it is not that simplistic. They were not all so stupid, and we're so much smarter than them. They are just. But I don't want to get into it right now because we're already past our time. But Sylvia wanted to say something, and then I'll wrap it up.
Well, it's basically the discussion. Sounds like we're still stuck in this cycle.
Yeah.
That what?
We're still stuck in this cycle.
I don't know if we're. No, I don't think we're stuck in the cycle about idol worship. I think we're stuck in the cycle. I think. Yes, we are. Yes, I think I agree we are. But that is I think because we are now in the historical period, very similar to that historical period. We're in the 2-3 generations after entering the land of Israel, returning to the land of Israel after a very long exile. In our case today, a much longer exile. Much longer, right? We're talking in the book of Judges, an exile of, let's say, 400 years. Let's say from approximately when Jacob went down to Egypt with his 70 family members. Let's say that's the point of exile. So you're talking about 400 years approximately, less even. Let's say 400 years. And they all went from one country, from Egypt, to one other country after 40 years in the desert. We're talking about 1,800 years of an exile, and Jews coming back from all corners of the earth. So yes, I think this is a perfect example of Tanakh, not just teaching us something about what happened back then, but it's creating for us a model of what is the dynamic that appears when the Jewish people are forming anew in the land of Israel. There's going to be you will need to drive out. You will have wars against the nations around you. You will gain control of the general territory, but you're going to have years and years of struggling with those other nations, and those other nations will be the cause. They will be the catalyst for all kinds of internal struggles. They will be the catalyst, and they will for struggles, for failures and successes that over a long period of time will allow you to grow and develop into what we'll see later on is one unified nation that has a clear idea of what its goal is, what its destiny is. Even that won't last for a very long time, but it formulates the nation into one united nation that for a glimpse in Jewish history epitomizes, who we are and what we are as a nation. But it took hundreds of years. But the nations that are there, they are the catalyst. They are the okay, we understand. I just want to add one more thing, which is, we said everything seems to be so mishmashed. And I'd say even this cycle, this is clear. This is very well organized. Why isn't this the first chapter of Judges? This should have been the first chapter of Judges. It's so well put together. It's so articulate. It's so giving us this broad. It's very rare to have such a... And by the way, this is not a speech given by anyone. We saw Joshua give a speech about his perspective of Jewish history. We saw Moshe give a... This is the narrator is giving us like this big picture, like historical, philosophy of history. So this should be chapter 1. And I think that goes back to what we said before, and also why it doesn't tell us who the prophet is. Because we don't want you to think, meaning there is an internal structure to this book. But that's not the main experience of what this historical period is about. It's a period of chaos. There isn't organization. There isn't a clear leader. Even the leaders that we'll see, some of them were leaders of only one tribe. Some of them were a leader of 3 tribes. And some of them were leaders, and other tribes fought against the leader that meaning if we were in chapter 1, it'd be like, oh, this is so well organized. I have a very clear idea of what this book is going to look like, of how it's going to operate. No, the first chapter, that epitomizes the book. No clear leader, no clear mission, no clear goals. But it's telling you in chapter 2, there is an internal logic. There's an internal structure that couldn't be seen while it's taking place. Only in the broad perspective of history we can look back and say there was a pattern that it was following. Okay, there was a pattern to the chaos. Okay, with that, I wish you guys a Shavua Tov.
Thank you. See you next week.
Yep, next week.